From 1939 to 1945, Germany's war economy underwent profound transformations as the Nazi regime mobilized all available resources to sustain its military ambitions during the Second World War. Even before the outbreak of war, the Nazi economy had begun to prepare for large-scale conflict, driven by Hitler's desire to expand German territory and establish a dominant position in Europe. Under the leadership of Minister of Economics Hjalmar Schacht and later Hermann Göring, the Nazi government pursued a policy of autarky, aiming to reduce Germany's dependence on foreign imports and prepare the economy for a future war. This involved massive state investment in rearmament and infrastructure, such as the construction of the Autobahn, which could also serve military purposes. By 1936, the four-year plan was introduced, which focused explicitly on accelerating the production of weapons, munitions, and other military supplies, and developing synthetic substitutes for essential materials like rubber and oil, which Germany lacked. This shift marked a departure from a peacetime economy to a state-controlled war economy, with an emphasis on self-sufficiency and preparation for total war. The outbreak of war in September 1939 forced significant changes in the German economy as the country moved from peacetime preparations to active wartime production. Initially, the Nazi leadership believed the war would be short, and they did not immediately impose a full-scale war economy. However, as the conflict expanded and continued far longer than anticipated, Germany faced the challenge of sustaining its military forces while dealing with resource shortages and the need for greater efficiency. In 1942, Albert Speer was appointed Minister of Armaments and War Production, and he implemented sweeping reforms to rationalize and increase production. Speer centralized control of industry, reduced bureaucratic inefficiencies, and introduced measures to optimize factory output, such as standardizing production models and prioritizing key industries related to armaments and vehicles. These changes resulted in a significant increase in the production of tanks, aircraft, and other military equipment, even as the war's demands grew increasingly severe. Speer's efforts were supported by the exploitation of occupied territories and forced labor. Millions of foreign workers, prisoners of war, and concentration camp inmates were compelled to work in German factories, mines and farms under harsh and often brutal conditions. The use of forced labor became a critical component of Germany's war economy, with workers coming from across occupied Europe to fill the labor shortages created by the conscription of German men into the military. This exploitation was not without its costs, as forced labor was often inefficient and required significant resources to oversee and manage, but it provided a temporary solution to Germany's pressing labor needs. The war economy and its demands had a profound impact on daily life in Germany. As the war dragged on, rationing of food, clothing, and other essential goods became a permanent feature of life. German civilians were issued ration cards to regulate their consumption, and items such as meat, butter, sugar, and coffee were strictly controlled. Fuel and heating were also rationed, and civilians were encouraged to conserve resources to support the war effort. Shortages became common, and many people had to rely on the black market or substitute products to meet their basic needs. The war also led to widespread restrictions and a militarization of everyday life. Air raid drills, blackouts, and bomb shelters became part of the routine for many Germans, especially in cities that were targeted by Allied bombing campaigns. The intense bombing raids on major cities like Hamburg, Berlin, and Dresden caused widespread destruction, displacing millions of people and creating severe housing shortages. As the war continued and Germany began to suffer defeats on multiple fronts, the economy came under increasing strain. Production levels began to falter as Allied bombing targeted factories, transportation networks, and key infrastructure, disrupting the supply chains and further exacerbating shortages of raw materials and finished goods. The situation became increasingly dire as the war progressed, with women, older men, and teenagers being mobilized to work in factories and perform civil defense duties. Civilians were constantly reminded of their duty to sacrifice for the war effort through propaganda campaigns and the Nazi slogan, "Total war, shortest war," which urged them to endure hardship in the hope of a swift victory. By the final years of the war, Germany's economy was in a state of collapse. Despite Speer's efforts to maintain production, the cumulative effects of military defeats, resource shortages, and relentless Allied bombing left the economy struggling to function. Food and fuel shortages became acute, and the destruction of transportation networks made it increasingly difficult to distribute what little remained. Daily life for German civilians was marked by increasing deprivation, with many facing hunger, cold, and fear as the front lines drew ever closer to German soil. The Nazi regime's initial ambitions for economic self-sufficiency and military dominance had, by 1945, given way to a desperate struggle for survival amidst the ruins of a shattered country.